Hi, Vicki.
Hi, Caitlin.
How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing?
Let's see.
My office is cold, so I'm sitting here like,
Oh, we deal with that here too. Oh my gosh. Kate and I always are bundled up.
I know. It's like I'm either hot or cold. I'm just never in the right spot. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, Andy just zoomed past me. He's on his way back to his office, so he's going to be
Okay.
hopping on here in a second. So,
Okay, perfect. So are you guys okay with us sharing our screen at first, just so we can give recognition to the sponsors as Daniel's introducing, the program and Andy and all of that. And then what I'll do is I'll just enable you all to share your screen.
oh,
So
yeah.
once
Yeah.
the presentation begins,
We'll
we
share that
can.
with Andy here too. He's hopping on. I
Okay.
hear him.
Okay.
And then, but yeah, that should be fine.
Okay.
Well, I thought I heard him. Oh, that was Daniel. Okay.
Daniel. Yep. We're really looking forward to this presentation. So.
Well, good. So are we.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah. It's such a timely, whether it be general diversity or whether it be, disability inclusion and all of that, it's a very timely point right now. So it's
Yes,
good
absolutely.
timing for the team. So, hi, Andy.
Hello.
Hi, Andy. How are you today?
Good, yourself?
Doing well. Thank you. Oh, and we have Daniel on here.
Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, Andy. How are you?
Good, yourself?
I'm well. I'll be introducing you. Can you tell me how you pronounce your last name?
Traub. It's a short O sound. Traub. Traub.
Got it. Thank you. Looks like we'll have about 35 or so folks joining us today. Pretty exciting. Great topic.
Fantastic.
Important topic.
Absolutely.
Good.
Okay. Daniel, I'm trying to make Andy co-host here, but it looks like I can only give him host.
You might have to sign in.
Okay.
I don't have rights as of right now.
Right. Yeah, I'll fix it. This is why we do the test run, right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Always a good idea.
Yes.
We've done test runs before, and then somehow something happens when we start the presentation.
Well, you can't predict everything.
No.
Murphy shows up.
I
Come
know.
on, Murphy.
Yeah, absolutely. I once gave a presentation for another organization I worked for, and we were at a conference in LA, and I had all my bases covered, but I forgot to plug the power cord to the laptop.
Oh.
And
Oh,
as
no.
I'm giving my presentation, the batteries is unbeknownst to me. Luckily, it died as I was wrapping up, and people were like, "Wow, you timed that perfectly." I'm like, "Timed what perfectly? Like your screen is off." I'm like, "Oh, no cord."
I was just in a call this morning, in a conference call, and we're going along, and it flashes your battery is running low, and you only get like 5 hot seconds to plug in when that
Right.
pops up. I wish it was more like a gas tank, like you had 3/4 of a tank or
Right.
a quarter of a tank left. It's like, oh.
I've driven pretty close to that gas line.
So I'm a K-State grad. So I was headed back, had a friend of mine from Baylor. So we went to the K-State Baylor basketball game a couple years ago. And as you're coming into K-State, obviously you got 570, you're going down 177, right? Exit 323. Anyway, so we get off the exit and I'm like, I think I'm going to run out of gas. And I have that feature on your cars, like how many more miles you have.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I know the high point. If I can actually get to the high point, we might be able to coast down. And we are a mile and a half away, maybe 2 miles away. And we're on the coast down and it goes 0. And I'm like, so far the engine's still running. I was able to kind of cruise into the gas station right there at the bottom of the hill. But I'm like, Okay, that was way too close. So
That's
it's
some
like,
scary
good.
stuff there.
Yes, to say the least.
I luckily have never run out of gas, but I think I've gotten pretty close.
Yeah, that was.
Just don't run out of oil. That's worse.
That's even
Oh
worse.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
true,
yeah.
true.
That would be terrible.
That sounds like somebody who knows experience, Vicky.
We won't talk about it. No, my dad would have killed me. No,
Somebody from Nebraska, you don't run out of
that's
oil.
right. My dad would have.
Kaylin, you get it figured out?
No, can you come out here real quick, Daniel? I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm having technical difficulties. And I want to get this resolved before we start the meeting.
You need to sign in with it.
I did that. And so if you go to meetings, and then I tried to edit in here.
Go down. Next meeting, alternate co-host. Daniel at KCK Chamber.com. You should read it. Just join now. See what happens.
Okay. Well, I'm already on, so.
Okay.
Well, see, right now I'm sharing my screen. Okay, here. I figured it out. So yeah, well, you should both be able to share a screen. Thank you, Daniel. So let's just go ahead and just run through it real quick. I'm going to share mine with our sponsor slide, Randy.
Okay.
And then, can you all see that?
Nope.
I don't think I've ever had this much trouble. Sorry.
Kaylin's our tech whiz.
I know. And
Now
I'm
the
really,
pressure's on.
I'm really kind of embarrassed right now because
No, you're fine.
Don't be embarrassed.
It's all
Remember-
good.
Hey, you're less
I think
techie
I've got
people
all
than
these
us.
horror stories. I was given another presentation at Google Fiber, and we couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work. It was kind of crazy. I was just like, I mean, you name it, it's happened.
That's not good when you're at Google Fiber giving a presentation on their Wi-Fi. That's a bad.
It was at that event space that they have on State Line in West.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, let's go ahead and have you share your screen. I just want to make sure that's working properly.
I do have that feature. You should see the Zoom credentials.
No, I'm asking for Andy.
Oh,
Do you
I'm
have a
sorry.
PowerPoint presentation, Andy?
I do.
Okay, let's have you share your screen.
And Caitlin, if you want to send me the slide, I'm able to share on my side.
Yeah, I should be able to. Okay, that looks great.
You see it now?
I
Where'd it
see
go?
it.
Yes.
Mhm. It looks a little small. Are you doing the slideshow?
You should be able to go to display settings. Yeah.
Yep. There you
That's
go.
better. Mhm.
Great.
There you go. Should be at the beginning.
Mhm.
All right, and if you can just stop sharing right now and just have that queued up. So when after Daniel introduces you, Andy, we'll just have you, I'll stop sharing my slide and you can start sharing yours. That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that slide up here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Make it a slide.
Let's see.
And just on timeline, what time did you want to open it up to question and answer, or what do you normally do?
We typically give about, Well, it depends on how long your presentation is, but we always give about 15 to 20 minutes
Yeah.
for Q&A.
We should be pretty good with that.
Yeah. I won't be long. I'll be pretty
Questions
quick.
are going to be coming through the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll monitor those. And Caitlin, if you want to handle that when it comes up,
Yes,
the Q&A.
I can do that.
Perfect.
All right, let me try it this way. Does that look better?
Display settings, yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay. All right, and it looks like some folks are starting to enter. Do you want me to go ahead and start letting folks in?
Sure.
Okay.
And Andy, we'll probably get going around 12:05, just depending on how as people trickle in.
Works for me.
Hey, Julie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Always great to have you on the call.
Yeah, good to see you.
Andy, Julie and I are former track athletes. We ran together at UMKC. I'm going to say many pounds ago for me, but
Let's just leave it at many years ago. How about that?
many years ago. Right. Always great to see you, Julie.
Welcome, Julie. I'm a track athlete too, but I'm the parent who has to run and try and get times across, run across the field, given splits. So, yeah, I think cross country and track are, all participate type of spectator events. So it's fun.
Right. And Julie, you were a hurdler, right?
Yeah, so I did sprints, so.
Yep, I remember that.
And now I do the longer distance runs and I hate them. And when I say longer distance, I mean like 3 miles is painful.
Oh, really? I was going to say, because my wife and I are doing half marathons and we're doing one in every state. So
Wow.
33 down right now. So it's been fun, but yeah.
And that's probably kind of come to a little bit of a halt, I'm sure, with.
Yeah, people don't want to run in packs. I don't get it. No, I'm just joking. You can run, but put a mask on and then you're just going to die. So that's, yeah.
Andy, are you in Kansas City?
I am. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. The Plaza K had their race on Sunday, and I saw some pictures from it, and I think it was maybe only 800 runners. It looks like they did a really good job of like spreading out and
staggering
hitting people. So
it's a nice thing about being chipped, right? I mean, it doesn't matter when you cross that start line. It's like, that's when your clock starts. So it does allow a little bit more, but I saw the half was the last one, or the half and full in October was the last one to actually be canceled in the United States, the major ones. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I was almost wondering if, I'm not sure if they did it this way, Julie, but like in the Tour de France, when they do individual time trials, they really just stagger folks. I wonder if you could do it that way. I don't know.
yeah.
My kids are running cross country right now, and so it is kind of that staggered start, which is really interesting, because if you go out and you're not one of your top varsity runners hitting certain times, you actually may get passed by a team that's behind you that started out a minute behind you, and it's really kind of disheartening. Some of the
Oh
kids
man,
are
that's
like,
yeah, that's tough.
it's like, oof.
I really enjoyed my time at UMKC, and the team. It was a great team. It was just awesome people working hard. Hello, Commissioner Philbrook. Good to see you.
Ryan Richard invited you to connect. Why? Who's Ryan Richard?
That's me. I'm a gentleman here. I'm with Andy in the background. I just like adding names and faces together. Not usually in real time, though. That was impressive.
Andy, are you good with us getting started?
I am.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Caitlin, if you can continue to monitor the waiting room and let folks in as they trickle in. Good afternoon, everyone. Daniel Silva here, President and CEO of the KCK Chamber of Commerce. And thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited about this topic. It's an important topic, and as we continue to think about how we can improve our organizations and become more diverse and more inclusive, I think it's always very important to be very intentional. We definitely are doing that here at the Chamber and doing our best. I do want to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors that are listed on this slide. Again, as we continue to work our way through this pandemic, it's been the support of our sponsors and our members that have allowed us to continue the chamber work. So to our sponsors out there, thank you very much. And to all you members, thank you very much. Let us know how we can be of service to you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Andy now. I'm not going to read the entire bio because I'm eager to jump into this and then start learning more about even how we can be better at disability inclusion here at the Chamber. Andy Traub serves as Vice President of Human Resources at Allied Inclusion Works and Allied Global Services. Andy is a nationally and internationally recognized leader in both disability and diversity in employment and has worked with employers such as Google, Best Buy, Walgreens, Office Depot, Toys R Us, Amazon, Starbucks, Sodexo, and Kroger. So quite an impressive list. Andy, thank you for being here. We appreciate you joining us today. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, let's make sure we get the right screen going here. Everybody see my slide deck, I hope? Anybody shake their head or see it? Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. Thank you to the KCK Chamber to actually present this topic about the journey to disability inclusion. It's very timely as October is Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so it certainly is a time where disability employment, even in spite of 2020 being as crazy as it has been, certainly it's going to become a topic of discussion. So what I want to do today is kind of walk you through what the journey looks like. And I will say it is a journey. We'll talk more about that. Any company, even if you think you're good at disability inclusion or think you're on the right path, there's always something else that can be done. And so today, hopefully we'll be able to provide to you kind of a snapshot of where you're at or where you think you might be, and then also where you want to go and some ideas for you to be able to get there. I want it to be a practical conversation today. Let's talk about tactics. When I get done with this webinar, can I take something away and implement it or look at my my company through a different lens, starting at really 1:10 this afternoon. So anyway, so let me start working through this. I'm not going to reintroduce myself because I'm with Daniel. Let's just get into it. So today we want to talk about, what is a disability? We hear that term being kicked around a lot. What is it and how do you classify it? What are the real and potential barriers to employment with the employment life cycle? What are some of the basic tenets of how to and where to start a disability hire initiative? The great thing about these type of initiatives, you can start right where you're at. And so we're going to give you some tactics on doing that today. Gain insights, the tips and tools, and how you might be able to remove barriers within your own organization or for individuals who might identify themselves as an individual with a disability. And then really understanding what self-identify is versus self-disclosure. Those of you who might be federal contractors who are listening on the call, certainly those two terms may be very near and dear to you. So the self-identification versus self-disclosure, and what does that look like? So let's talk about the enormity of individuals with disabilities. Disabilities used to be a taboo conversation, even 20 years ago. People were, we had institutions where it's like, if you had a significant enough disability, you basically just went to live your life out in whatever type of environment you might be living in, but it's more state funded, federally funded, or, institutions, let's just call it what that is. But there are 56 million individuals in the United States living with disabilities. And we're going to talk about what does that look like here shortly. But this talent pool is really I've been in HR for 25 years, been in recruitment most of those times, but until the past 12 to 15 years, did I really understand that there are people who are qualified in pools that I wasn't even looking at with my lens in which I was viewing talent. So when we talk about this talent pool of candidates, it's growing, obviously. Right now, it's approximately 30 million, 400,000 individuals of working age, of people who've actually stated that they want to work, and they are in that 18 to 62, 65 range. At least, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, at least 20 million people with disabilities have grown up post-ADA, which we've just celebrated the signing of the ADA, this past month. And then certainly with COVID-19, there may be people who haven't been classified or viewed themselves as individuals with disabilities in the past, but COVID-19 is changing that. And we're not even sure what that may look like, but it certainly is highlighting underlying conditions for people. So if you sit there and you take all the numbers and you really break it down, it's 1 out of every 4 Americans has a disability. So that's significant. There's a possibility that, and we'll talk about why here, but that number may actually go up. Instead of 25%, it may hit 33% in the next couple of years. So if you take this 1 out of 4, and that's the general population, you take that as an employer, and you're like, well, we really don't hire people with disabilities, or we're not sure we've hired people with disabilities. But if you take that 25% and you lay that over any population, if you have 100 people in your business, there's a possibility that 25 people that you've already are employing are individuals with disabilities. So it's not a matter of, am I going to be recruiting? It could also be a matter of, am I retaining my talent? And certainly with the baby boomers aging out of work and finally saying enough's enough or what have you, or even the fact that baby boomers are staying longer, there's a high probability that you're employing people right now with disabilities, whether they've disclosed to you or not. Especially when you look in light of this statistic, only 17% of the people were born with their disability. That means 83% acquire their disability later in life. Most likely, they may acquire that disability while they're working for you. So it really is not just a retention or recruitment, but it's also looking at retention and how is my company set up, not from the front door, but is my back door closed because I can retain my talent, or people who may age into a disability feel I can't be accommodated by my company, so I'm gonna have to go look for other work. And that is, the brain drain that's happening with our baby boomers having so much experience in leaving the workforce is something we'll never be able to capture and replace. So the internal impact of having that is 20% of your workers will experience a disability lasting 1 or more years during their professional lives. And the rate accelerates when employees pass their mid-40s. So I am one of those individuals. And so in my, not too long ago, probably 3 years ago, I think is what it is now, I had a significant heart attack. And so never would have thought, even though I run half marathons on a regular basis, that I would be wearing bracelets saying that I have, heart stents in and that sort of stuff. So it's one of those things that it shows up, and you, as an employer, what are we able to do with that employee? What can we do for that employee, and how can we accommodate that individual? People with disabilities represents the talent pool, which crosses all other diversity dimensions. And diversity is, you can't turn on the TV right now without hearing something about inclusion, right? And for whatever position that story might be on. So it doesn't matter if you're a veteran, if you're second chance, if you're in the LGBTQ community, if you are a person of color, if you are a Caucasian individual, doesn't matter. The disability community is everybody in terms of every type of walk of life in that group. So it's the one diversity segment that unfortunately gets overlooked in our companies when we talk about diversity programs, but it is the one segment where anybody can join at any given time, and it's not voluntarily. So keep that in mind. So what is this term disability? So ADA and the ADAA, so those of you who are in human resources will know that, and we had the addendum Amendment Act to ADA, which changed the way disability was viewed within our workspace. So what is termed as a disability is anything that would be a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities, such as, and these are just some of the lists: seeing, hearing, standing, lifting, bending, learning, reading, concentrating, or communicating, or even working. So any condition, physical or mental, that would impact any one of these, person could be considered protected by the ADA because it can be considered as a disability. The interesting part about it is also with the ADA, the Amendment Act, the burden of proof was removed from the employee. So if they basically say, I'm an individual with disability, as an employer, we don't ask what's your condition. You know, the only thing we ask is how does it impact your essential functions of your job? Can you continue to do your essential functions of your job, and that sort of stuff. So you know, people don't have to go into providing documentation after documentation. And those of you who were in HR or hiring managers prior to that change with the ADA, sometimes we would actually get reams of paper. We were getting entire you know, files of people with their disability, they, you know, to try and fight for their rights. But unfortunately, you know, fortunately now, if they say I'm an individual with disability, we have to take that on face value. So as we mentioned earlier, with baby boomers retiring, people with disabilities are now the largest untapped labor source that we have. And again, as I mentioned, it's not about going through and saying, let's do this for charity. I want to feel good about myself. We're talking same job, same qualifications, same pay, and this is not about charity. So it's same qualifications, same expectations, same pay, same job. So we're not carving out anything within our world at work. We're just saying, can you meet the essential functions of our job? I will tell you, and having gone into many companies to where they wanted to hire to feel good, right? If I hire somebody who has a cognitive disability, I want to feel good because I'm helping somebody out. The ironic part about it is the actual flip of that happened. So it's like, yes, you might feel good on today, but if I'm hiring somebody in the same job with the same pay and same expectations, or I'm hiring somebody in the same job, same pay, and I lower my expectations, what does that do to your incumbent workforce? What does that do to the people who've been working there, who have certain metrics that they have to hit or certain performance standards they have to hit, but we're saying this person is going to get the same pay but half the work? That turns into a recipe for disaster. That turns your I'm going to feel good about this hire to a very short-lived feel good to a significant headache, because now you have internal strife. And so what you were thinking was going to be a really good thing to make you feel good as a hiring manager and as a company turns into a disaster. So it is about the same job, same pay, same expectations, and it's not about charity. All right. So let's talk about this disability inclusion journey, as I alluded to earlier. It is a journey, but we've kind of tried to segment it out a little bit to help us kind of wrap our heads around it a little bit. So the first step is disability inclusion is not even on our radar at the company. We're not doing anything intentional. As Daniel mentioned earlier, it's about being intentional about this initiative and about hiring individuals. But then there's also those of us who, you know, hey, I'm a federal contractor and I have to hit certain numbers and we have to report, and so therefore we have to do this. So we might be at the compliance stage, and we're going to break down each one of these stages here in, you know, in the next couple slides. Or it could be, hey, you know, we're past that stage, but let's become more competent in disability employment. Let's understand more about it. Maybe I'm getting some people trained and that sort of stuff, and what it looks like to hire people with disabilities. Then maybe we develop our capabilities. Maybe we're starting to view disability employment as maybe it's a market changer for us. Maybe it's a competitive advantage. Maybe it's, you know, let's get more into the disability space. And then certainly the last spot is where you start viewing as a company the value and the benefit and the ROI on hiring people with different abilities in your organization. But as I mentioned, I'm going to give everybody just kind of a minute or 10 seconds probably. Look at this chart, and in your mind, I'm just going to ask you, where are you at on that journey? And then where would you like to be? And some of you might be, hey, there may be just 1 or 2 stages that we might want to move to. Or some of you is like, you know what, we're not on the radar, but I think this could be something where we could be competitive. And how does that work? And what on earth do I do about that? And so we're going to give you some practical tips on how you can move from stage to stage. So a company whose disability is not even on the radar may wrap all their diversity together, but does not talk about disability inclusion. It's like, we're a diverse workforce. Okay, great. Lump everybody together, call ourselves diverse, and that's where we're at. Okay, fine. You might view disability inclusion from a physical plant standpoint only. It's like, hey, you know what? We can accommodate people because we have an elevator. That's fine. We may have, where we sit there and we're having people who, we have wide hallways. Great. From a physical plant standpoint, you might be able to accommodate somebody with a disability. Or when leadership asks about disability inclusion efforts and they say, I don't know, because it's stuck in HR, or somebody else does that. Or, you know what, we have a chief diversity officer. That's even more embarrassing when you have a CDO and your leadership says, I don't know what we're doing about it. We'll have to talk to our CDO, because now it's not part of the culture. It's a task. Internal culture is, if you've got it, don't talk about it, right? Don't ask, don't tell. If I have a condition, I don't know if my company is going to keep me on board if I tell them. Yeah, that's still very real. And which is the sad part about it is 35 years ago when ADA was signed, that's one of the reasons it was signed, was because people were discriminated against. And that, unfortunately, we hear time and time again, that is still philosophy with some hiring managers or some leaders is, you know what, if you need accommodation, we can't accommodate you here. Or I'm just afraid as an individual to tell people that I need a screen reader, so I'm gonna go find another job. Obviously, accommodations are taboo. The big A word, accommodation. Suddenly I'm going into my legal team. We have to accommodate somebody. It's a scary piece. It's something to where it's like, it's such a complex issue. We just don't talk about them. I've actually had some companies that are fairly large, and I'm like, so what type of accommodations have you provided recently? And they're like, we haven't provided any accommodations. I'm like, well, first of all, high probability you have been. Second of all, the fact that you're not sure of what you've been doing tells me that it's stuck in some hiring manager or some supervisor who's probably accommodating people and you don't even know it. So, but then we give through our foundation or through donations. Okay, great. That's our corporate social responsibilities kicking in, and that's where we talk about disability. So we're going to give to different types of organizations who deal with people with disabilities, and that's what we do. And now we're inclusive. Okay, fine. So those are some of the characteristics or some of the things you might see with a company who doesn't have disability inclusion on their radar. So let's go to the next section. We talked a little bit about earlier, compliance. It's most likely from a federal employee, federal contractor, OFCCP driven lens. So it's all coming from the compliance department. Somebody's tracking the different categories that we have so we can compete for our employment contracts for the government. Federal government. So Section 503 of the ADAA, the Amendment Act, OFCCP Section 503 talks about a utilization goal. And if you're in the compliance world, you understand what those two terms are, but that's basically saying that if you're a federal contractor, you have to hire at least 7% of your population at certain job levels to be individuals with known disabilities. If you're over 100 people, now you're having to do individuals with disabilities at 7% at every one of your job classifications. So it does really change how we look at individuals with disabilities, but then there's the part of people don't identify. They don't come out and say, I'm an individual with a disability very often, or they're reluctant to, and really because it's the fear of discrimination. Section 503 also puts in there data collection requirements, the invitation to self-identify, which you send out to all your employees, incorporation of the Equal Opportunity Clause, records access, and that sort of stuff. So if you're a federal contractor, this is not new to you. If you're new to the federal contracting space and this is new, I'd encourage you to go out to the OFCCP website, look up Section 503, and it'll walk you through what all those requirements are. Competence. Now we're starting to understand a little bit more about the disability employment. So the company has a written diversity policy that specifically references individuals with disabilities. So a lot of us have, you know, in HR and in companies, it's like we have a very broad diversity statement, diversity policy. Now we're starting to slice them up a little bit more and highlight different populations that we work with. But then we also have a written accessible accommodations policy, which all managers are trained on regularly. Too many times I'll ask HR and say, do you have a written accommodations policy? And they'll say yes. And I'm like, okay, great. Where's that? And they're like, it's in the binder in the HR room. Well, do your managers know how to access that? Do they know? Are they trained on what an accommodation looks like? Are you talking about it? Do your new hires know how to, you know, access the accommodation protocol? If it's just written and nobody knows about it, the federal, you know, the courts have said just because you have it written does not necessarily mean it's implemented. So you might want to check and see, do you have an accommodations policy? And if so, is it up to speed? Is it what you want? And do your managers and your employees know how to access it? Then there's the applicant tracking system. So many of us have had to go to that for compliance reasons, but also some organizations take in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of resumes a year. So how do I manage all that? Well, we had to go and leverage technology. The interesting part about it is applicant tracking systems are fine, but they're not necessarily always accessible. So a lot of ATSs have some sort of helpline. If you need help filling out this application, please contact this phone number or this email. The one thing I would, if you do have an ATS and you're on the call today, one of the things you can automatically do when you get done with this call is to go to your ATS, find out what that helpline is and call it or email it, and then start the clock. How fast does it take for somebody to get back to you? Oftentimes, this is one of those things that we do just as a low-hanging fruit. We will go in when we do the audits and help companies with their inclusion efforts. We'll go in and that's one of the things we'll do. You'll be surprised how many times that line, quote unquote, is unmanned. It's not going to anybody. It's going to a voicemail. It's going, and who's supposed to be responsible for checking it? So that helpline or that help email address it's worse if it's there and it's not manned versus it just takes a day or two for somebody to get back. But remember, people are looking for work. They want to come to work at your facility. And if it is a telephone number that's going to a voicemail and that's their barrier, I think we could probably take care of that. So anyway, so that's one thing you should certainly look at. But then recruiting and hiring managers are trained on disability employment practices. Certainly a lot of people say my recruiters, they understand what it's like to hire an individual with autism. Okay, great. Or do they? You know, one of the things that hiring managers, especially people who have tenure, you know, it's to look me in the eye. If they look me in the eye, that's a key thing for, you know, I'm making a connection. The interesting part is there's a lot of conditions out there to where they may not necessarily look you directly in the eye. If it's an individual who has autism, they're never going to probably look you in the eye. And people, I've had managers in the past say, you don't look them in the eye, you're always hiding something. Really? No, they're not. You know, and so it really gets down to my recruiters, are they trained? But then also are my hiring managers trained? Doesn't matter if the recruiter is trained. It's what are we doing with our hiring managers who are making the ultimate decision? Are they trained in the process? The interesting thing is that as individuals do get through the process, do get hired on, it's that hiring manager they have an extreme loyalty to. So that hiring manager really does need to understand what they can do, what they can't do, and how they can do their job the best as they can within your organization. So then we get to the capability side. Companies establish an employee resource group, an ERG or BRG, focused on individuals with disabilities. Senior leaders are publicly discuss and promote disability initiatives. So it's no longer, I don't know what we're doing, they're championing the cause. Designated diversity and disability champion. That's great. The next part about it is the big piece, with an ability to impact change. Oftentimes people low within our HR organizations or somebody who just really has a passion for disability inclusion may get tasked with, well, you're our champion, but they're never given the ability to execute and make change within the organization because they don't have high enough level of authority. They are, kind of dismissed as, well, that's just an HR thing. Don't worry about it. It'll blow over. We've heard all that in our HR worlds. But make sure they have the ability to impact change, or at least partnered with somebody who can make that change. Interview strategies are established to meet the needs of individuals with different abilities. I can't, in a normal room where we're in a classroom setting or in a lecture, I'd probably ask you, raise your hand if you deal, most of your interviews are based upon behavior-based questions. And what we'll do is probably get a third, if not half, of the room would raise their hand and say, yes, we use behavior-based questions. The interesting part about that is behavior-based questions for individuals with disabilities, it turns it into a game, right? I mean, in reality, it is a game. There's certain questions and answers that if you answer a certain way, you're going to be able to get to the next level. If you answer a certain way, you're out. So when I was at AMC and we were developing the AMC Focus program, which was based upon intentional hiring of individuals with disabilities, and we used autism as our baseline diagnosis to build our program off of. We asked 10 individuals with autism the question, if you found $20 on an auditorium floor, what would you do with it? Now, most of us would be able to sit there and say, oh, well, we're turning that in, we're giving it to supervisor, we're giving it to, whatever. 9 out of 10 said they put it in their pocket. A very honest answer, right? But not the one that's going to get you probably to the next level. And so we're like, wait a second. I get it. It's an honest answer, but what are we really trying to get to? We're trying to get to see if they are trainable. So we changed the question to, if you found $20 or something of value on the floor of an auditorium, in our training, we train you to give it to a supervisor or to customer service. Is that something you're willing to do? And they're like, yes. Great. That's all we really needed to know. So deconstructing some of those behavior-based interview questions to help people answer in a way that gets them to the next level is great. I mean, that's really what we want to do. Now, yes, I mean, we could play the game and we can knock people out all day long in that question, but that question in of itself is a barrier, right? And so what do we need to do to be able to change some of that? And then certainly all employees and managers are required to take part in annual disability inclusion training. It's just being able to be, proactive and establishing the fact that this is something that's important to our company. Then we get to the competitive approach, where we are valuing disability employment as a significant initiative for our company. So we're going through and we're checking our websites to make sure they meet accessibility guidelines. Oftentimes we find that the recruiting sites are accessible, but anything else past the recruiting site or pages or links within your company are not. And so it's really understanding, hey, I might actually be able to have individuals who may be consumers with disabilities come see what we're doing, or they can't. Formal centralized accommodation budget. Accommodations oftentimes are put within the departments. One of the best practices out there is to have a centralized accommodation budget, which does several things. One, it allows managers the freedom of saying, hey, I'm gonna pass this along to my HR group and they'll help us go through the process. The other thing is it allows managers not to sit there and say yes, no, I'm a knee jerk because they think something may be too expensive. Most accommodations actually cost less than $500 and majority of them are actually free. So managers and company leaders' annual reviews include disability hiring and retention metrics. That's a huge piece. And that's a game changer right now. Now you're actually holding me accountable. Yes, we are. Long and short-term strategic planning includes disability recruitment, inclusion goals, and metrics. Obviously, in business, what gets measured gets managed. Same with this, being intentional. And then the entire company views disability inclusion as a competitive advantage to where it's being celebrated. You're putting things out there to where people with different abilities are achieving greatness, and you can actually show that on your intranets or company postings. One of the things I will say is disability inclusion is not just, hey, we're doing training and we can recruit. It's really looking at this full spectrum, and that's what we do here at Inclusion Works, is we help companies with it. Is, we look at training and education, we look at the facilities, inclusive environments. We talk obviously about the accommodations, we talk about recruitment and hiring retention. One thing I will say is this is kind of an order of how you go about developing a disability inclusion process. Recruitment's number 5. A lot of people, a lot of companies think recruitment's number 1. And so the belief is, we believe you have to get your house in order first, and that sets everybody up for success. What's worse is, okay, let's start with recruitment. We trained our hiring managers, we trained our recruiters. Now let's start a disability inclusion process. Start hiring people. That's great. But what about the people who are working next to that individual? Have you prepared them? Have you looked at the facilities, which we talked about earlier? Is our environment actually inclusive? And how do we handle accommodations? If we start with the recruitment process, the level of success drops dramatically because of the fact that you have to figure out all these other things on the fly, and that's not the time to do that. So being proactive is certainly the way that works. So, hey, this sounds great. How do we get started? So you have to develop a business case, especially if you're going to champion it. What does that look like? And as I mentioned earlier, we're past this. It's not charity. If it's corporate social responsibility that's trying to drive it, it can't be sustainable, because what happens is the next charity, the next thing that comes up, suddenly you get funding cut, and now you're no longer dealing with the disability community. It's the next greatest thing. So it has to be baked in business, and this is good for business. This is good for a whole lot of reasons. And so what I want to do is kind of walk through some of those business metrics that are out there that you can start looking at. Obviously, lower turnover. So I mentioned earlier that individuals with disabilities, when they get hired, first of all, they may not have had a long-term job in the past. So to be able to sit there and say, somebody's giving me a chance, I'm going to show up every day. I always tell the story, started an initiative, and we had an ice storm. And the ice storm shut down all the company facilities around the region. And an individual called me and said, "Why can't I go to work?" Well, there's a 1/4 inch of ice all over the place. He wanted to be at work, and he hated missing work. And so, there's that level of commitment and employee loyalty to the company. So actually lowers the turnover. A good disability inclusion initiative can also help provide new customer opportunities. So people with disabilities in the United States has an annual discretionary spending power of $220 billion, which that does not take into account family, friends, and supporters, which that level of income now is paying right about $1 trillion. So that's a huge piece when you couple it with 87% of consumers agreed or strongly agreed they prefer to give their business to companies that employ people with disabilities. Now, if you're at the C-suite, now we're talking about, if we do this right, we can increase market share. A lot of companies, it's like, it may or may not be their top 4 or 5 reasons for doing a disability inclusion initiative, but it certainly is a significant level when you start seeing, consumers start to move their money and dollars your way because of what you're doing and as being a disability friendly employer. Reduce recruiting costs. Obviously, we talked about the lower turnover. Oh my gosh, how many times do we have to recruit? And if we're doing turnover on a regular basis, if we can lower our turnover, our recruiting costs go down. The other part about it is the disability community can in part be its own recruiting source, because if you are doing disability inclusion well, they actually will start recruiting within their own sphere of influence and within their own ecosystem. So it's like, okay, great. We had an organization in Tennessee was really at an area to where they struggled to find employees. But then all of a sudden, Volkswagen showed up with the production facility, Amazon showed up with the fulfillment center. And this is a fairly small town. The interesting part about it was is they hired an individual with vision impairment. She was very good, and they actually moved her, and she loved what she did. Suddenly we started seeing other individuals with vision impairments coming and applying. Suddenly we have 20 people on the job who have vision impairments, but we set up the accommodations already. And so it actually, that we didn't have to go recruit. It was actually word of mouth. But you also find that your employees will actually become your own brand ambassadors, because they will be going out and helping recruit once you have a strong recruiting disability inclusion. Increased safety and return to work. Individuals with disabilities, they have to be safe all day long. And it doesn't matter what environment they're in, they're going to be incredibly safe. So there are metrics out there. I'd point you to a Walgreens study to where they actually saw that the people with disabilities were actually safer on the job than the incumbents. But the really interesting part was they were returning to work faster than other people who were injured on the job. So if they did get injured, they were coming and they were getting back to work much quicker than others. Increased productivity, as I mentioned, they've earned their spot, they feel empowered. So there may be increased productivity, not just by the person with the disability, but having the person who's working next to that person who may be going, wait a second, this is a new person and their productivity numbers are there. I've been on cruise control for a while. So suddenly you start to see departmental productivity go up. And we'll also talk about, here in a minute, some other reasons for that, but people will want to do everything they can to keep their job. And if you set the same job, same pay, same expectations, that's what you should be expecting, is that you're going to be productive, and oftentimes they'll blend that, increase that curve. Now, one thing I will say is sometimes, depending on what their condition is, you may have to elongate your training schedule, right? So at AMC, it was 2 weeks from the time that you came in to the time that you were trained that you should be on the floor doing your job. We actually had to stretch that a little bit, and it became, it's like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. As long as you are progressing positively, we keep you in that training area until you're ready to move out and be on your own. But there does come a time where it's like, if you're capped out and you can't get to the level of proficiency that we asked for, then we were, obviously separating ways and moving on. But it is about the same job, same pay, and same expectations. The other part side is that it creates positive workplace culture. We've actually seen engagement scores go up across the board in facilities where disability inclusion is intentional. And so people feel good that they're doing good at work. And then also people feel that it frees themselves to be able to be who they are. You'll find people are self-identifying as an individual with a disability because they feel it's a safe place to talk about that. A lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, they're not going to self-ID right away. They're very skeptical of what you're going to do with that information. So it's like, so I have why do I want to do it? Why do I want to self-ID? And it is every time that we do training at companies, we always build in extra time because we have people standing in line talking about either their self-identifying or their experiences with people with disabilities and that sort of stuff. So this whole positive culture and positive workplace is a real thing. And like I said, engagement numbers can show that. There's also monetary incentives. I always put this as kind of my last slide for the business case. There are ways to go out and get some funds to help you start your disability inclusion program, but they're designed to help you start, not to be a sustainable, revenue stream. We've had some companies and large companies who decided they were going to go out and they wanted to base their ROI on what they're going to get back in work opportunity tax credits, or WOTC. If you know anything about WOTC, it's dependent upon the state, what state you're in, how backed up are they. We had one organization that was based out of Washington, the state of Washington, and we did some checking for them because they're like, hey, what's the ROI we're going to be able to get from WOTC? we call and did some search and some research on it, and come to find out that the state of Washington is actually 2.5 years backed up for qualifying people for WOTC. So it's 2.5 years before you actually may see some return on that on your taxes. And then of course there's all the tax laws. Can you actually benefit from that? So anyway, so there are monetary incentives out there. There's some things, some programs out there to help you for the first 6 months of training somebody for the job. You might get 50% back for helping with during that training period. So there are ways to get some funding, but I always say, you know, if you're relying on the government, you're at the whim of whatever the next vote is on whether or not that that funding is there or not. So one of the big questions is, you know, are you ready? You know, is your organization ready? Are you ready as a professional in terms of how do I start this or what have you? You know, and we talked about, you know, the journey and some of the opportunities that are there. You know, what are your next steps? Maybe your next step might be, you know what, I'm going to go to my applicant tracking system or my recruiting software and find out what that accommodation button is and try it myself. And maybe that's your step. Maybe it's talking to other people within your organization, or maybe it's, you know, talking further with other people in your organization, or people that you might find who are interested in disability inclusion. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I know that was kind of a fire hydrant for everybody, but certainly we have about 15 minutes left, right on the money. So if you have questions, I'm certainly, first of all, if you learn how to spell questions, let me know, because apparently my slide doesn't have it right. So anyways, sorry about that, everybody. That's a slight typo. Okay, anyway, sorry, I am human, I guess. So questions.
Thank you, Andy. And I asked folks to pop questions into the chat. I don't see any, but if you have one, go ahead and unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
No questions.
I have a few, Andy.
Oh, feel free, Daniel.
And my head's spinning a little bit right now. You know, we pride ourselves on, you know, becoming a more progressive, more inclusive organization. We've been working really hard in the minority and women-owned space, business space. We're trying to diversify our board. We're advancing initiatives around, you know, gender and age. And I think we've kind of missed this whole piece of it, you know, if I'm speaking honestly. And we're not a big organization. We don't have full-fledged HR department. Mm-hmm. So how does, and I would consider us like a small business, you know, we're a team of 5. How do we do this? You know, I guess that's my question. And how do small businesses do this? If you're a, you know, 10 employee and under type firm.
Right. So one of the things I actually would say is there's a perception that I have to be a Starbucks in order to do this.
Right.
And the ironic thing is, organizations that are that large, we all know there's a lot of red tape to try and navigate, and it may take a very long time. The smaller organizations actually are more nimble. And to your point, it's like, hey, we might have missed the boat. So what do we do next? And so I think this is scalable. Disability inclusion is really kind of boils down to, you know, is my house in order? And then am I actually, you know, how do I become a disability friendly employer, whether I'm an employer of 5 or whether I'm an employer of 500 or 5,000 or 50,000, whatever. There's processes that are still there. And so, you know, one of the big things is really identify where you're at. What do we have in place and what don't we have in place, and what are our gaps? And so we have at Allied with Inclusion Works, we do a lot with businesses to where we'll go in and help them, you know, from a non-biased view, is to start doing, you know, it's really kind of an audit, but it's through the lens of disability inclusion and equity that's there. And so that's one way. The other way is, as I mentioned earlier, it's, you know, I listed off several things that are just kind of tactics that you can start, you know, the conversation, or even start looking, hey, let's talk about accommodations. Do we have an accommodation policy? Because the ironic thing is you have to have one, even if you're an employer of 5. So what does that look like? Or how do we want to be viewed in our community? Are we a disability friendly employer? Do we have things set up? Are our job descriptions in a situation where we're not automatically kicking out people who are reading it going, I can't do that because it requires for an accountant to lift 65 pounds. Well, that's old school, right? I mean, accountants now, I mean, you have a mouse. It's what we're not asking them to lift the banker boxes full of documentation. So it's really kind of looking at that and putting that perspective and having that view where you're at. So that's, so as I mentioned earlier, it's a step process. Where are we at on our facilities? Where are we at in our policies and practices? And if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email, or our website, alliedinclusionworks.com, has a lot of things that you can do and how we can possibly be able to help, or you take away some things and start looking at that on your own. So it is something that I would actually prefer working with smaller employers in this space, because it's a smaller employer who actually hires the most people collectively. So that's something we could certainly do.
Thank you, Andy. Looks like we have a question in the box there. Deborah, care to state your question there?
Maybe on mute.
Yeah, I was asking that, can you refer us to, do you have a source that you could refer that can provide the occasional accommodation assistance? We go out into the public and we do programs, and occasionally we might need an interpreter or someone who maybe is deaf, or occasionally we might need, I don't know, some kind of accessibility out in a public place where we might be doing a program. So
Right.
Are there local places here that can help us with those kinds of situations?
So Deborah, I assume you're here in the Kansas City metro area?
Yes, Kansas City, Kansas.
Okay. So there's always the School of Deaf that's here in the metro area. There's also, there's the School for the Blind that's here. They provide resources. So there are some that some organizations can do it for free, depending on who you are or what you're doing. Other organizations, there's a certain charge for it. So yes, so I would contact the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind if you have questions about resources or needing something. Certainly, it's always hard to do something last minute, because then you're talking about the availability of those resources. So anytime that you have a heads up or know, like, hey, we're going to have a conversation, or we're going to have a presentation on this date, that could be something that you could certainly do. Your community colleges who actually do ASL, American Sign Language training, they oftentimes have students who are through the program or getting close to graduating, that this is a great opportunity for them to be able to go and try and be in real time. So that's another opportunity. I can't remember if KCC has that. I know Johnson County Community College has ASL training, but that might be something that you might want to look into as well. And that's probably more of a, if they're going to charge something, it'll probably be lower versus a professional coming in to do it. The other thing I would suggest is the Job Accommodation Network. It's called it's askjan.org. It's a federal website, and I've used it, in the 15 years I've been doing disability inclusion. I'm a frequent user, and so that's a great way to talk about accommodations in general. They'll give you great tips or help you navigate, whether it be the interactive process, whether it be, hey, somebody needs a screen reader. Do you have any idea what type of screen readers I might be able to use, or does it interact with this program? So the website's askjan.org. Great website, so that can give you kind of a more of a macro view as well. So hopefully that helps, Deborah.
Yes, thanks for those tips.
You're welcome.
Looks like we have a question from Lori Morenz. Lori, care to ask your question, please?
Hi there. Yeah, I've actually been in the job market since May, and I'm noticing a lot of well, there are some postings out there that are now combining affirmative action responsibilities with diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still looking because I don't know expecting in the D&I space when really I kind of feel this is relatively new for a lot of us and especially a lot of companies. So I know some of the requirements, they've talked about how it's going to be heavy in training. So they're wanting, affirmative action and EEO training to HRBPs and hiring managers. But in regards to your presentation, which was very good, do you know of a resource or do you provide any type of D&I specific training that could be incorporated into affirmative action and EEO training?
So yes, we do training, and we have a catalog of training materials and seminars that we can provide. So the EEO training and the affirmative action training, to me, if you're doing inclusion well, those things are all going to be taken care of themselves. So it's more of, I found in my career that when we go and say, I want to do the right thing, that EEO and that affirmative action was just kind of like, that's just going to come along behind us versus being drugged through and using that as the reason why we have to do things. It's, it's almost that mind shift to say, let's go do the right thing. Let's do it right and be more inclusive. And so we do inclusion training, as well as disability inclusion, and we do bias and unconscious bias training. We do HR training. So there's a lot of trainings out there, but it's how do you package it, and it's what's your leader. So EEO training, there are some, you could certainly go find some of that training, but you're right. Things are being blended now to where we're hoping that by being intentional in inclusion, the EEO and the affirmative action is actually going to take care of itself.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, it looks like we have a question from Commissioner Philbrook.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you or not.
Yes.
Cutting out a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know me and my computer. Well, that's a whole conversation. So, my question is, from your experience, Andy, have you noticed whether the state/local workforce boards are of any help in this category of inclusion and disability? Because I know to have that section on them. I happen to be, I'm going to tell you, I am president or chairman of our local CEO, Chief Elected Officials Board for Workforce Partnership. And so I'm just wondering what part or how do you see that?
Oh, Commissioner, I think you froze right at your question. Sorry about that.
Frozen now?
Yep, you're getting there. Okay. Your question again, I'm sorry.
Okay, so how Workforce Partnership or those boards, that group in each area working with employers to help further this cause, because it is right. And I know that we have to do some of that, but how interact better?
Great question. Unfortunately, I wish I had a better answer for you. And what we're finding is, especially today, our workforce boards, everything is being flooded. So it's almost like right now they're fighting for their own lives to be able to stay afloat. They're incredibly busy. We actually partner with our workforce board, Kansas Works and that sort of stuff. So we are helping and partner with them. We have provided a significant candidate pool. So we've partnered right now with about 40 different organizations in the Kansas City metro area to help candidates kind of overcome the barriers. At Allied, it's a philosophy, not just a program for us. So we're working with Keeley and that sort of stuff over here. And so we have a great relationship. We've actually brought the counselors here We've hosted them here. We even bought lunch. So we're literally almost like right across the parking lot from each other. And so we're talking, because we're here at 84th and on 84th Street here in Lenexa. And so we're partnering with them, but it's more like we both know we reside in this ecosystem. So what parts can we use? And we've trained some of the counselors. They have a lot of training. They're very good, but how do I look at it through the lens of an employer, and how do I actually prepare candidates? And so we've done resume reviews for some of their candidates that might have a disability, veterans, service disabled veterans. We've done that as well. The interesting part about it is from the state side, the state, having worked with the state, it is really local. Hiring is local. The workforce, I'm a huge fan of Keeley. We've worked on a lot of different projects together. I don't see that across all workforce boards. And on the Missouri side, certainly, everything's local. And so I think if you have a really good team in one office, that's a good office. I can't say that it's on the radar as a statewide initiative, unfortunately.
Okay, I appreciate that information because, of course, Keely's so doggone busy. There's no way she can let us know everything that you all are into.
Right.
But I'm really excited to see that you are part of the team. Thank you.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We recognize the fact that for the greater good for everybody to work together, we can help not only impact an individual, we impact hiring an individual with a disability impacts that person, impacts their family. Suddenly now you're impacting their community, and it has ripple effects. And so, yes, Keely and I think we could probably go for hours on our own soapboxes about this topic. So we're kindred spirits in this role. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad you guys can do it. That way I don't have to get on mine.
Sounds good.
Andy, it looks like we're right at time, and we want to be respectful of people's time today. Thank you very much for today's presentation. Great content. Folks, you see Andy's contact information there. If you have any more questions or how to get this started, please contact him. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again to our sponsors. Really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.